Hi, everybody. Welcome to our first live stream at One on One. It's such a pleasure to be here with you. My name is Christine McLean Lewis, and I have with me today Stuart Hilton from Simtai Consulting. And before I get into this Jamaica Data Protection Act live stream, we're going to be talking about preparing for the Jamaica Data Protection Act. I just wanted to get a sense of who is here, who is excited, who has questions about the Jamaica Data Protection Act. So let's start by you telling me where you're joining from. Where are you watching this live stream from? Watching it from Jamaica, which parish in Jamaica? Where in the world are you watching this live stream from? Just let us know in the comments. So just put a comment and tell us where you're streaming. Well, not streaming, but where you're watching from. Love to hear from you. Anybody here? I see 3 people are watching. So who are the 3 people? Tell us where you're from. Just type a comment. I'm from Mandeville. Let's start there. So I'm streaming from Mandeville. Stuart, where are you streaming from?
I'm streaming from Kingston.
Of course. Oh gosh. All right. So nobody's interacting with us right now, but we'll get into interacting with the audience as the stream goes on. So, as we are going to be talking about the Data Protection Act, Stuart is one of the best people to be speaking about this because he has a wide range or a wide breadth of knowledge that he can share about the topic. It's what he does at his job at Simtai. So I'm going to allow him to introduce himself, tell us more about who he is and why he's so equipped to talk about the Jamaica Data Protection Act.
Sure
Oh,
thing.
some people are responding. Okay.
Good afternoon, Christine, and good afternoon, everyone. Christine, you gave my bio right there, but yes, I'm Stuart Hilton as Senior Manager for Data Privacy and IT Compliance here at Simtai Consulting Limited. We've been in the privacy and in the data protection space for a few years. I particularly am supporting the team that is delivering on our compliance and data privacy services, which are geared towards helping companies understand what they need to do, as well as to get them to the point of registering and managing their privacy compliance requirements on an ongoing basis. So we're helping them to transform what they do to become compliant to the Data Protection Act and to realize value out of what they're doing with the data that they do have.
Awesome. And that sounds so interesting and exciting. I'm really excited about this discussion because there's so much that we don't know about the Jamaica Data Protection Act. And I'm seeing some people responding to my question from before. So Sasha Wright says that she's from Kingston. All right, Sasha. Richard is from Kingston. Everybody's from Kingston and St. Andrew. No people from rural Jamaica. Where are my Mandeville people, my Manchester people, Clarendon. Nobody from those parishes. But it's good to have you guys. Good to have you,
I see
Sasha,
you have
Richard.
Odin Lewis from.
Yes, Odin Lewis from Mandeville. My husband. Well, good to have you guys. Good to have you. So let's dive into the discussion. So, Stuart, what is the Jamaica Data Protection Act? Let's start there.
Sure. Starting from the basics, the Jamaica Data Protection Act is the legislation that provides companies that collect, process, and store personal data here in Jamaica, and or those companies that are overseas that collect, process, or store personal data for persons in Jamaica or doing monitoring in Jamaica. That those companies now have a set of requirements for how that data should be collected, processed, or stored, because it is providing the requirements for how to protect the data as well as how to maintain the privacy of individuals. So it really is saying that you have a responsibility as a data controller that is collecting information from individuals to treat that data responsibly.
And is this act very similar to like the GDPR and all of those other acts that are international, used
Yes.
globally?
Yeah,
Okay.
so we have legislation all around the world and all throughout the Caribbean now. So countries like Barbados, the Bahamas, Cayman, Trinidad had passed 1 year ago and are in the process of looking at it again. Lots of countries in the Caribbean and us in the Caribbean have framed our legislations mainly based off of the General Data Protection Regulation, which is the GDPR out of
GDPR.
Europe, right? But there are some
Awesome.
there are some differences that we do have to pay attention to between our legislation and the GDPR.
Oh, okay. And since you mentioned that, what are the key differences to pay attention to between both legislations?
Right. Okay. So, of course, the scope. So, GDPR,
Mm-hmm.
of course, is concerned with data about European Union citizens. So, of course,
Mm-hmm.
anybody from France, Denmark, Germany, etc., those European Union countries. Whereas,
Mm-hmm.
whereas the Jamaica Data Protection Act is concerned with operations here in Jamaica and data about individuals in Jamaica. Another key thing to know is for data subjects, as in persons who are covered under the legislation here in Jamaica, it
Right.
includes not just persons that are uniquely, not just what it says naturally identifiable persons, but naturally identifiable persons living or deceased up to 30 years. So that means, that's the difference between us and the GDPR, because the GDPR doesn't include persons who are deceased in that protection requirement.
Interesting.
There are some other differences, such as the fines are a bit. There are some differences with the fines, but another key one to note, of course, is our legislation requires that you have to submit a data protection impact assessment on an annual basis, whereas the GDPR really indicates that you are required to submit a DPI, what is called the DPIA, under particular circumstances. For example, if you've had a major change to your processing activities, or if you're processing certain types of data, then you have to submit one, whereas we are required to submit one annually, regardless of those
Mm.
circumstances. Yeah.
Interesting. So the Jamaica Data Protection Act sounds much more stringent and rigid than the GDPR. Is that the case?
Well, there are some things that we have to wait on, such as supporting regulations for the Data Protection Act as a legislation, to really see
Mm-hmm.
what some of those requirements really mean. But
Mm-hmm.
that being said, part of what I think is happening is that we are a bit our data protection as a requirement is not as mature as Europe, because
Mm.
GDPR, while it was passed in 2018, was really a change in what was the data protection directive out of the EU from before. So they had,
Okay.
Europe has been practicing different requirements under data protection and data privacy from before, and then GDPR, because of its extraterritorial scope and some of the
Mm-hmm.
significant fines, persons really started paying attention to this, and the world is really saying, well, you know what, really and truthfully, we do need to have stronger practices in protecting the privacy and safety of individuals, because
Yep.
we are living in this data economy where we're collecting large amounts of data, we're
Mm-hmm.
processing data in all sorts of ways, we're sharing data, and we do need to ensure that the data subject, the information that the person who the information is about, that they are comfortable with what we're doing.
Definitely. I completely agree with the magnitude of data that is being processed daily and how
Mhm.
companies are using that data. It's so important for companies to protect the data that they're using. And with that said, I want to hear some feedback from the audience. So, audience, social media viewers, what what do you know about the Jamaica Data Protection Act? Like, what have you heard about it, and what are some of the concerns that you have about the Jamaica Data Protection Act? Let us know. Give us a comment. And I'm seeing some people, somebody from Saint Elizabeth and somebody from Saint Anne. Look at that. Yes, people outside of Kingston. I love it. Yes. So, guys, tell us what you know about the Jamaica Data Protection Act and what your concerns are. And I think these comments are taking a while to come through to our end. So I'm giving you a few minutes. All right. I'm not seeing any comments coming in, but if I see something pop up while we go on in the discussion, I'll definitely ask. But Stuart, when we talk about this magnitude of data that companies are processing and what they're doing with the data, does it mean that data protection is only an IT concern within a company?
Great question. And no, data protection is a business concern, meaning that we as a business, not just the IT function, but we as a business have to be concerned about how the data is being processed, stored, and used, even collected. And a
Mm-hmm.
lot of those processes, when you think about how data is collected,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't always fall on IT. It's not necessarily that we have a front end interface, meaning we have a web page that persons can enter their data into in order for
Mm-hmm.
them to get onboarded as a customer to our institution. But it could be that we have salespersons on the ground who are asking customers to fill out physical forms. Now, that data that exists on that form has to be protected in the same way that we would protect the data once it gets to an IT system, because we could fill out a paper
Interesting.
form that
Mm-hmm.
has your name, email address, even your credit card data, depending on what your environment is and how you use or process data. And we are
Mm-hmm.
now required to protect that data in all its forms. Once it's in, legislation really says any type of filing system. So that could be a
Wow.
physical filing system or a digital filing system. But
Okay.
yeah, when you think about, a lot of companies are still doing a lot of manual work around even like the human resource element for us
Very true.
onboarding and collecting data for our employees. And
Mm-hmm.
that may be on a physical paper, and that may sit in a physical file cabinet. And in those areas, we really do have to protect the information in the same way that we protect that data that sits on a file server sitting in Virginia or some other state in the US.
And when you say protect the data in the same way, like how do we protect the physical data in the same way that we would the electronic data?
So we have to think about what are the adequate level of controls.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say that is, data protection is a risk-based item. We think about whether what could go wrong in this process and what is the potential impact if something does go wrong. So
Mm-hmm.
if someone can walk through my front door, walk
Mm-hmm.
into my HR office and pick up a bunch of files from the HR desk or from an open cabinet, then that's a
Oh
risk.
my God. Yeah, big risk.
And now I have to think, what is an appropriate level of control to prevent that from happening? Now we
Right.
think, and of course we think about internal persons as well as external persons, but the idea is we don't necessarily have to create Fort Knox for everything. What we
Mm-hmm.
have to think about is for somebody who walks through, for somebody who may be strolling around their office, what do we need to do? A physically locked file cabinet may be good enough. In
Mm-hmm.
some instances, we may even want to think about getting a fireproof safe, and making sure that that is now locked, and we are as best as possible ensuring that only the persons who need to access that data are able to get it. So meaning, it may be the HR persons alone who have the
Mm-hmm.
code to get into the safe, in the same way that we wouldn't now we wouldn't now provide that code to everybody else in our office. But we have now entered into a system that prevents just anybody from walking into our office, picking up HR files or employee files and walking out with them. In the same way that an electronic system, we think about what are our logical access controls, which means a
Okay.
password, a username, a password to log into a system. And now we've gone a step further, and most time, and we're seeing a lot more use of what you call one-time passwords or
Mm-hmm.
tokens. So you get
Right.
a token or a pin on your phone. So
Right.
those are some of the controls that we're putting in, because there's a higher risk of there's a higher potential for persons to get access to some of your systems, given that we are so electronic now. We
Mm-hmm.
connect to a lot of, you and I are talking over the internet.
Right.
What do we need to do to ensure that no one else jumps into this conversation? So
Exactly.
we have those control, because we're connected over the public internet. We now have to think of another level of control that makes it less
Right.
likely for somebody to potentially bomb our conversation right now.
Agreed, agreed. So Sasha Wright is saying that she doesn't know enough about the Jamaica Data Protection Act, and she's asking how does this impact schools? Let me put her comment right here. And there's somebody else, Joya, is also asking how does the Jamaica Data Protection Act affect her prep school and what do they need to do? So the impact on schools is a big question from the audience.
Yeah, sure. And it's important to know that in general, the Data Protection Act applies to anyone who is collecting, processing, or storing personal data here in Jamaica.
Mm,
And
okay.
the definition goes on a little bit further than that, but I won't overcomplicate it at the moment. But what we have to think about, if you are, and schools are included. So if you are a business, whether it be
Mm-hmm.
profits, non-profit, government entity, church,
Mm-hmm.
special interest groups, if you are collecting data for
Mm-hmm.
individuals here in Jamaica, you are now required to follow the requirements of the legislation. And what does that mean? If you're a school, you are collecting data, of course, from students, parents, from the teachers and staff of the institution, and you now have to do things like clearly understand what is all the data that you have, why you're using it, what is your lawful basis for using it, and there's what are considered six lawful bases, meaning that for what legal or legitimate reason you have to
Mm-hmm.
collect this. If you are collecting mother's maiden name because that's historically how we've done it, but you have no basis for collecting it, you can't say
Mm-hmm.
that we're collecting this because it is used in this type of way in our institution. Then
Mm-hmm.
we have to stop collecting it and start removing that from our systems. Because
Interesting.
what we have to compile is called a record of processing activities that outlines all the data that we're collecting from persons. Who are the groups that we're collecting the data about? Meaning, in this case of the schools, it's students, parents, teachers, and staff. And we put that into a document that we're going to use for registration with the Office of the Information Commissioner,
Okay.
which is the deadline is November 30th, 2023. So that's
Okay.
one of the items that we have to prepare. And that goes
Mm-hmm.
for, as I said, it's going for anyone who would be called a data controller, which is anyone that is collecting data, collecting or processing personal data for
Mm-hmm.
persons here in Jamaica, or if you're doing monitoring activities here in Jamaica. So
All
schools have
right.
to adhere to those requirements in the same way that other large or medium-sized companies have to.
Have to, okay. And following from that, because you mentioned some aspects of preparation a while ago in your response. So, how can organizations prepare, whether they're schools or for profit organizations, how can they prepare for the Data Protection Act?
Mhm. Well, the first thing I like to tell persons is don't panic in any way. Now, some of this is going to sound very new, and that is completely understandable. So it's a very new concept to a lot
Mm-hmm.
of persons, and that's fine. Some of the terminology is going to not be so familiar to us, but what
Mm-hmm.
we can do is take time to understand it and and you start to see how simple some of these things are. Now, there are some other technical things that we may have to do depending on what's happening in our environment today, but from in terms of having to register with the Office of the Information Commissioner, which is
Mm-hmm.
we have to register as a data controller by November 30th. We really have to provide three or four main things. One is contact information for main points of contact at our organization. So,
Okay.
recognize who may be that main point of contact. Some persons may appoint it to the highest level position in your organization. Some people may have a risk function or a legal function, and they say, let's, put that point of contact. And you provide the contact information for that person at the institution or organization.
Mm-hmm.
Secondly, if you're an organization that has to appoint a data protection officer, then you provide that contact information. And not everybody has to appoint a data protection officer.
Okay.
Key thing to
Cool.
look out, right? Key thing to look out for is, are you processing a large amount of data? No, that hasn't been defined as yet, so I can't tell you if you're processing 1,000 records versus 10,000 records. Then it's a large amount of data. But think about the
Okay.
context of here in Jamaica. 10,000 or 20,000, probably is going to be considered a large amount because
Large.
not
Mm-hmm.
not a lot of companies are processing that level of data. If
Mm-hmm.
you are considered a public authority, and that of course includes a lot of government agencies and entities, as well as if the public has a general interest in what your business is doing. So we can think about our utilities companies that we have a utility that is not part of our government, but
Mm-hmm.
if their services were to fail, then we are all affected. Most people. So there's some public interest around that.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are, those are two examples. I won't go through the full list, but not
Mm-hmm.
everybody has to appoint a data protection officer. If you do have to appoint one based on the requirements, if anybody who's interested in reading, check section 20 of the legislation. It will tell you all of what is required there.
Okay.
You provide that
Okay.
information as well as what I explained before is your record of processing activity that's going to outline what data you have, why you use it, how you use it, where do you share it, does it get shared overseas? So it's, and you can find a template for this on the ico.org.uk website.
Okay.
Now we are, locally, our information commissioner is working on putting all of that information out and making it available. But what we are doing in the interim is using an existing resource, which is the Information Commissioner's Office in the UK. And that website again is ico.org.uk. You can go there, search for record of processing activities, and you can get a template that you can use to support the completion of that exercise.
Okay.
And that's the start. So I of course there's tons more information to give, but I will say focus on those items as well as having a clear understanding about what do you currently do to protect information in your company. What are some of the technical controls that you use to protect information? So if we have things under lock and key, if we have servers that are locked up behind some firewalls and we have encrypted data, then you think about those things because we have to make a statement to the Information Commissioner about what some of our technical measures are to protect data within our company.
In our company. Okay. And before I get to Camille's question, because Camille has a question, but following the preparation for the Jamaica Data Protection Act or compliance for that, isn't training a big part of it, and training in two senses? So training in the form of having all employees understand how they should protect data and how they should protect the company from attacks against data. So that's one. And then two, training through getting a deeper understanding of how to be compliant with the Jamaica Data Protection Act.
Yeah, very important, and something that we have to do on an ongoing basis. So it's not just a one time we've given people training and moved on. And Simtai and One-on-One have actually developed a course for a JDPA short course to help companies and individuals understand what are the requirements on the legislation. So we are using One-on-One platform, and of course, anybody who wants to find out more about that course can contact us at info@simtai.com. But we have this short course that will allow you, individuals as well as companies can look at it. It's about a 2 to 3 hour course just to understand some of the things I've been talking about so far and more, to make sure you're clear on what is required under the Data Protection Act and what are the things that you need to do to maintain your compliance, or you as an individual, what can you do to maintain your data subject rights?
Definitely. And also with additional training that you can offer to your team, One-on-One has courses that you can do in cybersecurity as well. So coupling that with what Simtai has is a great way to get yourselves prepared for the Jamaica Data Protection Act. And going to Camille's question, she is asking, what is my role as a data subject? What should I be looking out for? What can or should I say no to?
Sure,
So
a great
it's 3
question.
parts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So start from the beginning. What is my role as a data subject? As a data subject, you need to know what your rights are, and the Data Protection Act provides 6 main rights. For example, one of your rights is you have a right to know what data the company has about you. So if you have engaged with a company, you're now doing regular business with them. Say, for example, your bank. And for whatever reason, you may be interested in knowing what data do they have for you to make sure it's correct, or to see if there's any data that they've collected about you outside of what you've shared with them. You have a right as a data subject to make that request to the institution, and they are now obligated to respond to you within 30 days of that request.
Okay.
Now, there are some caveats around it to basically say if you're being excessive, if the request has been fulfilled, I mean, we can't call every day and constantly ask for data over and over and over. Those things will become excessive. So you should know your rights. And as I mentioned, there's 6 rights that you have: right of access, right to prevent automated processing, meaning if there's some automated decision that is made about you based on the data you've provided, you can request to understand what processing was done and whether somebody can look at your application to process you from a manual point of view, because there are some human elements to think about that may not be considered by an automated process, automated, decision. So those are just some of the things. You have a right to correct the information. So if you have requested your information and see, my name is Stuart Hilton, but they spelled it Hilton instead of HY, I can now request that be corrected to HY, or I've changed my address. So I have a right to request that my data be updated. And those are just some examples of the rights that you have. So of course, I think it's very important that you understand what your rights are as a data subject. In terms of what you should be looking for, I would say definitely consider whether the company that you're interacting with has made a deliberate effort to communicate and try to be transparent with you about their process. One thing that you can look out for is called a privacy notice, which is a document that indicates why the company needs your data in order to do business with you, how they plan to use it, how they plan to protect it, how long do they plan to retain it, and what are some ways that you can now fulfill your data subject rights if you choose to make a request. And they will also provide the contact information for whether it be a key contact or a data protection officer if it's required, because you may have to request some of this information or get more to better understand what's happening, because this is here and intended to help build a relationship of trust between you and the company. You need to trust what they're doing, and for you to do it, there has to be some level of transparency.
Definitely. So it's really important for us to know our roles as data subjects and to hold companies accountable for the data that they're collecting from us and how they're using that data. So thank you for that question, Camille. Audience, go ahead, Stuart.
Just the last part, Christine. So what can you say no to? You can ask if you get a form that asks for a lot of information about you. You can ask, do you need all of this information? And if you see information on the form that you're not sure about, you really feel uncomfortable giving, you can ask the question. Can you provide me with a legitimate reason for why you need this data? And if they cannot provide that to you, it may be a case that the person you're talking to doesn't know at the moment. But the point is, if they cannot provide you with a legitimate reason at the moment and that you feel comfortable with, you can say no to providing that information. And that should not hinder you from doing business with the company. And if you are being hindered at the moment, you should be allowed to then raise or escalate that with the data protection officer, so that they can at least communicate to you whether there really is a legitimate reason for why they have to, or a lawful reason for why they have to get information, or whether that really was excessive and some corrective action needs to be taken.
As you mentioned, the data protection officer, Stuart, what are the criteria for selecting such a person within an organization?
Great, yeah. So there is going to be more information to support exactly what the data protection officer role does and what are some of the qualifications necessary, because right now the legislation just says, and really just covers some of the key things to look for, as well as saying making sure that you appoint someone who is duly qualified. But what does duly qualified mean? Well, we look at what is provided under legislation such as GDPR, or regulations such as GDPR, and some of the qualifications that are recommended, of course, are years of knowledge with data protection legislation or data privacy.
Wow.
And I know that might be a bit hard to find in our market
Yes,
at the moment, but I mean,
exactly.
if we can find somebody who has like a couple of years, people like Simtai, then years of experience with privacy or data protection legislation, understanding of how to measure risk, because there are some risk components to this, ability to audit, because they have to check and see whether you are staying in compliance with the legislation. That's one of their responsibilities. And also things like having an understanding of technical measures. So being able to speak to if you're an IT environment, being able to speak to things like what does encryption mean? Why do we use things like a VPN? What does it mean to pseudo-anonymize or anonymize data? So they have to have some good understanding of some of those technical controls necessary to protect data and protect privacy within their organization. So it's a combination of things, and and a key thing to remember is this role has to be independent of the processing
Oh,
function, right?
okay.
Mhm. So the
Okay.
person has to be independent of the actual data processing happening. So a lot of times people think about it similar to how you look at like an internal auditor. They work for your company, but part of what they're there to do is to oversee and check whether you're staying in compliance with the legislation and make recommendations to improve that, or potentially report it to the information commissioner if we are continuously in breach or staying in breach about things that have been raised before.
Interesting. Interesting. And following from something that you said earlier, there is a document that has to be submitted annually to
Mhm.
remain compliant, right? Can you tell us more about that document and how the data processing officer fits in with preparing that document?
Sure. So the Data Protection Impact Assessment, or DPIA, is the
Mm-hmm.
document that has to be submitted annually to the Office of the Information Commissioner. Now,
Okay.
what this is what this in summary is your risk assessment that provides here are the risk and our mitigating controls to protect the rights of data subjects based on data we have, as well as to ensure that we're meeting the processing standards outlined in the legislation. So there's 8 processing standards and there's 6 data subject rights. And when
Okay.
we look at, so for example, we take, if we have a process that says customers can register or can create an account with us online, we walk that process through and we'll see there is a risk that information can be intercepted in transit, given that this is a public, like we are using a public internet. So there is the
Right.
possibility for somebody to pick up the information from our web page or from our interface, and that's how they can use it. And that is now going to infringe upon the data subject's right to privacy, and they're using our platform. So
Mm-hmm.
we think about that as a process, put what the potential risks are around it, and what are the controls that we are putting in place to prevent those risks from being realized. And then,
Mm-hmm.
there are some other things the document outlines, but the core of it is really to identify the various risks to persons' privacy and the protection of their data, and an indication of what we're doing to mitigate those risks. And we
Okay.
continuously update that and are hopefully reducing the risk over time so that we can continuously improve and better protect the rights and freedoms of individuals.
And with all of this that has been said, I'm going to go back to the audience and ask you, how prepared do you feel within your organizations about this, about compliance with the Jamaica Data Protection Act? How prepared do you think you are? Let us know in the comments. Send us some comments and let us know. How prepared is your organization? Have you started to look for a data processing officer? Are you putting measures in place to protect people's data? Is your staff trained in cybersecurity and able to manage cybersecurity threats? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. And while we're waiting for the comments to pull through, Stuart, there's a lot of concern, I guess, within Jamaica about how we protect data, which is why the Jamaica Data Protection Act has been enforced, or is coming into fruition now. So, based on the fact that there are so many challenges in Jamaica, what have you seen based on your experience as some of the most common challenges with data protection and data privacy
Mm.
in this country?
Yeah, I mean, the main challenge right now is that there are practices required by the Data Protection Act
Mm-hmm.
that companies never thought about before. So, for
Mm.
example, things like making sure that we get consent if consent is required. As in, we have asked somebody for the information. We don't necessarily have another legal basis or lawful basis for collecting it. So, therefore, we now need to ask the person to explicitly tell us, yes, we are okay with you collecting or sharing this information in this way. So, we are being
Mm-hmm.
clear about what's happening, and they have explicitly consented to us doing that.
Right.
Outside of that, if you think about, and from a technical perspective, we were forced, and in a almost gently way, but almost mandatory way, in order for us to continue to thrive during the pandemic, is to change a lot of how we operated and move to the remote space, both in terms of how we operated as businesses, as well as how we interact with customers, that we now have to allow persons to interact with us remotely. I mean, years gone by, this whole discussion may have been coordinated for some auditorium somewhere. We may not have been having this as a webinar, 3-4 years ago.
Exactly. So
so
true.
so we now have to think about the technical measures, and some things that have not really changed is just good practices for cybersecurity, such as ensuring that when we implement a new system, whether it be a web application, whether it be a new switch that we put into our firewall and we put into our network, those things we have to remove things like default passwords. Administrators get it, they put it in, and the default password still exists. Incorrectly configuring items to have the right level of protection. So, we put in a new system, or we've changed some configurations, and now we've opened a bunch, and sorry for some of the technical terms, but we've opened a bunch of ports, or you can think of them like windows that connect us to the internet and to other systems. We've opened a bunch of them that have now left us vulnerable and open to attack. So those, some of those misconfigurations and changing things like default passwords, or even enforcing strong passwords to our systems are some bad practices that still happen today on a regular basis. Yeah.
Wow.
So I definitely recommend, doing regular checks. If you have the skill set in house, by all means, have them continue to check and see what is your current status. Otherwise, have a third party come and give you an independent opinion. Companies like Simtai can help you by doing a cybersecurity assessment or other security assessments to determine where you are today and what are some of the things that you need to do to improve, and give you that in a way that allows you to now quickly improve your current systems and operations to be better protected.
Exactly. And I'm seeing that Nazimak is, I hope I pronounced that correctly, she's saying that, or he's saying that they're 98% prepared at their organization to become compliant to the JDPA. That's great. And anybody else wants to tell us how prepared you feel about this Jamaica Data Protection Act? Is your organization prepared? Are you ready? What are some of the concerns? We're opening the floor now for some of the concerns that you have, some questions that you have, burning questions about the Jamaica Data Protection Act and what your company needs to do to prepare. So as we're waiting for the questions to pull through, Stuart, are there any final tips that you'd want to leave with the audience to help them to get prepared for the Jamaica Data Protection Act?
Yeah, and the most important thing right now is getting started. You can do a little a day. You can try to put in a concerted effort. Very important to know is that this is not any one function in your business's responsibility. Everybody who is interacting with personal data, which is data about people, has some involvement. So it's going to be, if you're a traditional large-scale organization, you probably have functions such as IT, legal, risk, compliance, customer service, all the marketing. All of these departments are going to contribute in some way. So it may be useful to put together a task force of persons across those different units to help to put together the documentation necessary. If you're a smaller, right,
okay,
or a committee, if you are,
so sorry to cut you, Stuart, but when you say a committee, so we're going to be pulling people from each department within the company to be a part of this committee. That's basically what you're saying. Oh, okay,
yes,
okay.
Yes. So you need to have that representation, because what IT is bringing to the table are understanding what are some of the technical measures to protect data, and understand, and then providing as well what may be some of the recommendations to continue to better improve what you're doing, and provide. So they are bringing that technical understanding to the table, whereas risk may be considering, what is an appropriate measure of protection. Now that we understand what's in our environment, what really is an adequate level of protection to implement. We can't, as I said, we can't come in and create Fort Knox for everything. That really is not going to work from a functionality perspective as well as from a cost perspective. Right. So we need to put the right size band-aid on different cuts. And and same thing happens with marketing. Marketing is there to say, well, this is how we use data,
Mhm.
and this is how we use the personal data, and this is what we need.
Right.
So
Right.
if you're changing these processes, we need to have some input to be able to say, what can we now do now that we understand what the requirements are and what data we have? Do we have to now forego some of
Sure.
our planned activities, or can we continue to operate in the way that we were before? So you have to bring representation from the different departments that are using personal data so that they can
Mhm.
collaboratively move forward in how to improve what you're doing in the environment. If you're a small
Definitely.
organization, like if you're a doctor's office of one person, just the one doctor who does both the administration and billing and everything, as well as sees patients, but you have 200 you have 200 and something patients, you
Mhm.
still have to adhere to this legislation, and you as an individual may find it pretty difficult to take on your day-to-day activities as well as trying to meet the requirements of legislation. So you do have options. You can reach
Mhm.
out to companies like ours to assist you with helping to get ready, or you can use resources such as what I told you, the ico.org.uk, which
Okay.
provides a lot of detail in terms of how to perform things like the record of processing activities, your data
Mhm.
protection impact assessment, understanding what policies and procedures you can put in place to better meet some of these requirements. So it's a great resource to use in the interim until we start to get more guidance and regulation from the from the Information Commissioner's office here in Jamaica.
Let me just put that URL on the screen for everybody. Can you repeat it's ico
Dot
dot
org.
org dot
Dot
uk.
uk. Mhm.
Okay, let me show that. Hopefully everybody can see it. So you can check out this website, as Stuart was saying, and Sabrina is asking for the contact information for Simtai because you're doing a fantastic job, Stuart, and people want to contact you guys now to get themselves prepared. So how can people find Simtai?
So we are accessible at info@simtai.com, or you can go to our website, simtai.com. We have lots of resources there as well. We've done webinars, we've written tons of blogs surrounding Data Protection Act and what companies need to do. So you can reach out to us directly through info@simtai.com. One of our business development executives or other consultants may reach out to you once you submit an email there. And of course, simtai.com provides a lot of information as well.
Definitely. And also, as Stuart mentioned earlier, Simtai has collaborated with One on One to create an actual course that can help you to prepare for the Jamaica Data Protection Act. So you can definitely check that out when it's ready. And also, One on One has a lot of courses in cybersecurity that you can use to train your staff. So you can check both companies out to get the support that you need to prepare for data protection, cybersecurity, everything related to the Jamaica Data Protection Act. Now, Nazimak has a question that we're going to use to wrap up. So I'm not sure if this is a he or a she, but this person is asking schools that utilize online forms such as Google Forms, etc. Do they need to have disclaimers or agreements in place for end users to agree to?
Yeah, and
Based.
well, the direct answer is it depends. It depends on what information you're collecting. But my default response would be yes. Depending
Okay.
on what information what information persons are being asked to share, then
Mm-hmm.
and for what reason we're collecting it and what we intend to use it for, you may have to have a disclaimer that says we are collecting this information to do XYZ. Here's how we plan to protect it, and probably even just give a short snippet. They can
Mm-hmm.
click to see more information, but then they can now agree to that. Now, it's important to know that in your disclaimers, if there is something untoward that may happen. So, for example, we're collecting your information in order to sell it to a third party. You, even if you've put that in your statement, but
Mm-hmm.
it's hidden behind a lot of language. That, of course, as you can
Yes.
imagine, is an unethical approach because persons may
Very.
not necessarily see it. And courts in Europe have even ruled against it for even companies like Facebook that had
Wow.
statements like that way down in their verbiage. Because one of the requirements is that we have to have clear and concise understanding of what's happening. So we need to clearly provide to persons what is going to happen with their data and what they're consenting to. So persons shouldn't consent to something, hear that this has happened, and then be like, but me never know. Like there was 3 pages worth of document, and it was size 2 fonts. Some of the things that we've had our frustrations around as individuals. So we have to try
Right.
to be clear and to the point about things that may be of concern to individuals, so that they know what they're consenting to right away. And so Nazimak, I would definitely say it really depends on what the full scenario is. But if we're collecting data about people that is being used for particular processing, and we need to get, and it's a case that we don't have. Nazimak mail.
Oh, okay. Thank you for that, Nazimak.
And we don't necessarily have another lawful reason, like, boy, we have to do this. We need to meet a legal obligation or have a contract with the person. If we're collecting things for outside of that realm, then we do need to collect consent from them and may have to provide a disclaimer.
And as a question came to my mind while you were speaking about this whole thing, like when we're reading all of these terms and conditions, which we never read, these long documents, should companies have like a shorter version? Because I've seen some companies do that where they like pull out the main points from the terms and conditions or the whatever agreement, and then they present it to you so you get a snapshot of everything that would be very relevant to you. Would that help?
That would help. That would help. And not necessarily that it is mandated that they do it in that way, but it would be a good thing to do. And one of the things, one of the practices that is recommended is things like your privacy note. You do what's called a layered notice. So the layers are, you can see at the top level, here are all the main points: how data is shared, how data is stored, how data is processed, how long do we retain data. So you see those are key questions. So myself as a data subject, if I see that in a web page and I want to know more about how long is my data stored, I can click to that level versus seeing
Right.
this long page that I have to scroll through and scroll through and scroll through. So as you said, the key points out front, I may now get a hyperlink that then sends me to more information if I want to find out more about that particular item. So making it concise and to the point up front is always a great way to go.
That makes a lot of sense. All right, Stuart, I really appreciate you participating in this discussion with me. You have such a wealth of knowledge, and I know that the audience has learned a lot from you. If people, as you said, want to reach out to Simtai, they can contact you at info@simtai.com, correct?
Yes.
And they can visit the Simtai website at simtai.com. And just to close out, thank you everyone for being here. If you have any additional questions about the Jamaica Data Protection Act, you can always reach out to Simtai, or you can reach out to us here at One on One too, and we will get your questions answered and help you to prepare your organizations for this upcoming legislation that we all have to be compliant with. So, Stuart, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And this was great.
Thank you, Christine. Thanks for having me, and thank you, everyone.
All right, everybody. Bye.